My name is Paige McDonagh. I'm currently the Deputy Head of Year 11 at Woolwich Poly. I'm going to have a chat to you about how we sort of navigated pastoral care during the lockdown and the kind of ideas that we've implemented since. So initially we were doing lots of phone calls, but this was an issue with consistency. It meant that some key worker parents weren't available, and they felt like very isolated calls. So we'd make one and then wouldn't speak to them again for a couple of days, and they were sort of just very lone things. We were keeping detailed logs, but there wasn't consistency. Sometimes we'd have to leave a voicemail and catch up later, and we needed to make sure that we went back and wrote that down, and it was all just quite sporadic. And we needed our calls to become more structured. We needed to be able to get more information across, and we needed them to become more useful. And then the most important part for us was trying to think about how we could implement some kind of social aspect. So we were mindful of the fact that lots of students had missed seeing their friends, being able to speak to their friends. A lot of them commented on how they didn't have their friends' numbers, so they were very lonely, and we felt that we needed to introduce some kind of social activity into their days. So we started looking at using Teams and how we could use it most effectively to get students together, to be able to talk socially and for us to get information across. So we launched virtual and online tutor times. So we would have one form in each day via Teams, so that meant that we could have it on a rota basis, and we were focusing on only one thing per day. They would be the same time each week, and we would do them from Monday to Thursday, and we would save Friday for lots of catch-up sessions for anyone that had missed it from Monday to Thursday. And we'd sort of manage these around the live lessons taking place. We tried to make them the majority of the time in the morning, and that was A, so we could get them up early, and B, so we could replicate their time in school. So normally they would come in the morning and have tutor time, and we wanted it to feel very much the same. In school, we use tutor times in the morning as sort of like a settling period, and a time for them to get information and catch up with their friends and just have a little bit of social activity. So we wanted that to feel very much the same. So before they went off and did their live lessons or they did their work for the day, we wanted them to be able to have that kind of normality whilst being at home. So we were getting about 20 plus students a day, and so the turnout was really, really positive. And we also invited tutors to each session. This was really good because it allowed conversations to flow, sort of, chats like they normally would have in school. And for them to be able to see a friendly face. Often these students had sat at home on their own with just their parents, maybe one parent, and hadn't actually seen anyone else since. So it was really good for them to be able to not only hear us, but see us on video too. So we would all have our videos on so that they could see all of us. So I'll go through sort of like the schedule that we did. So both myself and the other heads of year would do a warm welcome. We'd sort of catch them up on what we'd been up to. So had we been baking, had we been doing some sports, and sort of just make things feel a little bit more normal and share kind of the stuff that we'd been up to. Tutors would then come in and say their little hellos. They'd also give a little update on what they'd been up to. It was really nice for them to be able to hear what had been going on, especially if they'd been coming into school and working in the hubs and things like that, so that the world outside was a little bit more normal than it seemed when you're just stuck indoors. Like I said, all the staff would have their video on. It meant that the students were able to see us and it felt a bit more personal. There would then be a brief chat, and this would usually consist of any changes that were happening. Maybe that was governmentally, sort of any new policies that have been brought in, and when the lockdown started being lifted and things like that. Anything that was happening at school, so if there were any changes to live lessons and things like that. We would then give them a little reminder on how to access and utilise online platforms. If anything new had been launched, we could share our screens and sort of go through how to get on there, share any sort of usernames, any information they needed to know. Then we would have what's possibly the most important part, a really good chat about mental health, so some ideas, strategies, how we were coping, which was, I think, really personal for them to feel like we were having anxieties and struggles too. So we were sharing our experiences with them. Tutors would often interject and say things too. And as things changed, as things moved on, we started to talk about like what life would be like coming out of the lockdown, the anxieties they may feel, strategies, ideas that they could put in place at home, and then sort of obviously signpost them to anywhere if they needed to, and then obviously know that they could talk to us. And then we'd go down the list and just say hello to each student. So this would obviously change depending on how confident they were, but we know our boys quite well. So some of them would just say, hi, I'm doing okay. And some of them would say hi and have a full-blown conversation with you. This was sort of where we asked our sort of well-being questions and allowed us to monitor anything that was going on, so anything we needed to catch up on later. And then we sat back and just put a topic out there and let the students just themselves and have just a chat about what was going on, especially really current events like Black Lives Matter, the reopening of shops, things like that. Students were really keen to talk about those kind of things because they're probably exhausted the conversations with their parents at home, so they were really keen to hear each other's ideas on them. So we sort of just sat back and watched and monitored what was going on, really. So we also did any sort of catch-up sessions on the Friday for anyone that had missed any sessions. We would also notify parents in advance of the schedule, so we would do it over 2 weeks, and we would notify them for their 2-week schedule. By doing it in the morning, it allowed us to catch up with any issues that we felt arose from the calls in the afternoon of that day. So these are some comments from some boys about how they felt about it. So when we got back, we had lots of chats with them, and when we'd call them after, they'd say that they were really lonely at home and they didn't have their friends' phone numbers, and it was really nice to be able to chat to them, and it felt like a tutor time in their house, and it felt really good to be able to see someone else's face rather than just their parents or the siblings. Then we sort of were at a point where the information that we were giving was really repetitive, so we'd have the same information shared over 2 weeks to every single form. And we felt that it wasn't really that effective. We wanted the form times to focus on wellbeing and socialising. So instead, we started to implement online assemblies. We found that the best way to do this was to set up a live event on Teams. And this meant that we could have students there, but they didn't need to be muted. We didn't need to monitor a chat, anything like that, but they could ask questions that we could then feed back on later. And then it also allowed us to make sure we were interacting with students that were watching. So if they had any questions, anything they needed to ask, they could write it into the sort of question and answer box, and we could get to that later on. We would follow the same sort of pattern as we would in school with an assembly. So we would give out all of our information at the start, and then we'd sort of talk about maybe the achievements for the week. So any information data we'd extracted out of Teams, and we'd share really good examples of work, comments from teachers. And then we'd also talk about a topical theme, so maybe sleeping, anxiety, eating, health, things that we probably wouldn't have had a chance to talk about on the phone calls because we just didn't have enough time. And then we could extract the registers from Teams and follow up with any phone calls for anyone missing assemblies and tutor sessions. So we could make sure that there weren't any IT issues or anything going on at home that we needed to follow up with. So we'd just follow up with a phone call for those. And then we implemented a really big end of term assembly that allowed us to give sort of shout outs to each student on how well they've done. We invited the whole staff, which was really good. And we also sent some certificates out in the post just as a physical sort of reward. And then we implemented some other things. So we tried to use Microsoft Forms, and we would send these out every now and again just to get sort of a gauge on a snapshot of the year about anxiety levels, how they were finding their online work. And it was good for us to find any areas we needed to intervene and any sort of topics that we needed to bring up either in assemblies or in the form time calls. We would use Power BI and Teams, and this was really good for us to be able to look at the engagement for the week, look at who wasn't completing assignments or accessing live lessons, and follow up with phone calls. We then also were able to look at those that were working really hard, make some positive phone calls, give them some rewards in Assemblies, and ask SLT to make some phone calls home, which was really effective. And then lastly, using Excel spreadsheets that we shared between staff. So ones that were live where people could edit together. So it allowed us to give RAG ratings each week on their engagement and highlight any concerns we could then intervene with. It was an easy and familiar way for staff to be able to share their information without having to send multiple emails. So that was kind of what we did and how we navigated it. We've implemented live assemblies on Teams still while we're in school, and we're still using Microsoft Forms and shared spreadsheets. So all of this stuff is feeding into our work now. I hope some of the things that I said were helpful. Thank you.